Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give it another minute before we get started. All right, for the sake of time, we're going to get started. Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for being here for our second in our job search series this year. Today, we're really going to be focusing on private practice. We'll hear from our panelists, get a different perspective on some job opportunities, what that could look like in the private practice realm, even some hybrid talks as well today. So, a little bit of logistics just to start. My name is Nicole Locke. I am going to be the moderator today. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. If you're live, we would ask that you please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll answer those at the end after the presentation. Please keep yourself muted if you are listening to this series. We appreciate it. If you can tell, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the TCAN YouTube page. And please give feedback if you can. Just to let everybody know that we do have more sessions coming. The ones that we have so far dates. Next month, we have June 15th is going to be a new part of the job search series panel. This year, we're going to talk about transitioning to your first job. So this may be great for those who are getting ready to become an attending in just a few months. Or even just right in the summer. So that'll be an awesome new addition. Then on June 22nd, we have scheduled our academic practice job search panel as well. We have a few more sessions to come later this summer that have not been decided on the date yet. If you want, all of our registration links can be found via that QR code. I first would like to start by introducing our didactic speaker today, who is David Horst. He went to his medical school, residency, and fellowship all at Baylor. He is currently still in Houston. He works for the Women's Hospital of Texas, which is a level 4 NICU center. He has lots of awesome roles, which makes him a great speaker today for us. He's the practice director for Pediatrics Neonatology of Houston. He's also the NICU medical director of the Women's Hospital of Texas in Houston. He's the chief of staff of the Women's Hospital of Texas and the national medical director for neonatology for the HCA system. So we're going to get started by talking a little bit about private practice. So I'm going to hand it over to David now.
Thank you, Nicole. And hello to everyone. I don't want to necessarily give advice, but just kind of run through just thoughts about private practice in general. I had the um, somewhat unique experience as staying at Texas Children's for what ended to be about 4 years. So I had a lot of decision making that I was pretty indecisive about to start my career post fellowship. Ended up staying for about 4 years and then going into private practice. Practiced actually up in Colorado, in Denver at the main private practice NICU up there. And then came back here to Houston about 8 years ago now, and have been practicing here since. Um, can I drive the slides or do I have to say next?
Unfortunately, you have to say next, so I'm ready for you.
Okay, I'll get over it. Okay. So ready for the next slide. So I'm just going to kind of run through some things that thoughts that I've had about what's the same and what's different between the two types of settings. Um, there are a lot of similarities depending on where you land. You can, and in this case, we do have a high acuity level 4 setting where you have all of the complex patients. I've worked in a private practice setting, including here where there's ECMO, cardiac surgery, all the full subspecialty support. It is a little bit different when you're not embedded in a children's hospital in a medical school university setting. You typically don't have the breadth. You can often have one of ones versus multiple folks. You don't get quite as many people talking about a subject or in as much detail. Um, QI support or QI opportunities are there everywhere, especially when you're scaled up to a larger NICU. Once you get to a NICU that's double digits for its average daily census, there's always quality work that you can do to do things better. And by the time you scale up, we have 108 kids here today. I think actually 112 after what I just heard. Kids here today. And when you get to that kind of scale, there are plenty of things to do to make sure you're doing everything well. Teaching roles is that's probably where the one of the biggest differences. There is teaching to do, especially if you get to a larger practice or a larger place. A lot of it is around um, teaching NNPs the role to help you out. You'll sometimes have med students, and we have med students here from the University of Houston. It's weird because we're in a big city. I'm actually looking at Texas Children's out the window. We have UT Houston up the road. So there's lots of trainees around, but it's not the same. I wouldn't pretend it's the same as having a fellowship program. There are private practice settings, a couple of them that do have fellowship programs, but those are pretty few and far between. But they're around. Dell and Austin would be one. I believe they're starting a fellowship program at Winnie Palmer in Orlando. So those opportunities do exist. Um, we do, and I can truly say this having been, and it's not something that you would think if you haven't been outside of, and you'll catch me, I try to say university instead of academic system because we do practice very academic medicine. We're up on all the latest. We read all the same things. The difference is I don't have my own research lab. I'm not fully embedded in one particular niche, but once you start taking care of this number of patients, and again, even if you're in a spot that's got 20 or 30 patients, you still care a lot about what you do. And part of the joy of the practice is to keep up with all the things that are going on, going to conferences and all that things. All that stuff does still happen. It's you have to work a little bit harder to seek it out. And you do have access to all the same things that everybody else has. Um, the differences, you really do have greater autonomy. That's probably, and this just speaks to my personality. It doesn't speak to the overall systems, but one of the reasons I left Texas Children's is because I just wanted to move into leadership roles faster and be able to do things without having to ask so many people what I did. And that really is true. The example that I use for this is 2007, 2008. I had left in 2006, I think. Went up to Denver. I was in that practice, and that's where went to a conference. And it's the one I remember Ann Stark was moderating a session and Ann Stark was my former chief at the time, moderated a session for hypothermia for HIE. We had the folks from the New Zealand study, the folks from the Toby study from England, and then we had the US study, then ICHT one. All those folks got together and we agreed, at the end, their panel was, we should start doing this. I came back to Denver and said, hey, I went to this great conference because in the practice, we always, if you went to a conference and we had CME money to go to the conference, you come back, your duty was to present what you found at the conference. Everybody presented it, said, hey, this is what we need to start doing now. We need to get out to our referral base and tell them that they're on the clock now. It's hard to imagine for you guys, I'm sure, but there was a time when if a kid came out With hypoxia, there wasn't anything different, but now suddenly everybody needed to know you were on a 6 hour clock to get the baby to some place where they could do it. And their response was, "Okay, let's do it." And they just looked at me like I was going to do it, and it turned out I was. We had the whole thing set up in maybe a month. Um, whole program set up. You just to here I was at that point 6 years out of fellowship, and I just got to set up the whole program myself. There was some oversight, but you get to do things a lot faster. It is definitely more of a clinical focus. You are spending most of your time on patient care. You don't have all of the academic functions, which are mostly around teaching and whatever research you're doing in your lab. Um, you can, and that is one of the things that I'm available to talk about for the rest of the hour, is there are lots of leadership roles that you can get into if that's something you want to do. One of the things when you're in a practice like this is, and one of the things to think about is um, if you go into a bigger practice like mine, there's lots of people around, like Dr. Kaplan, who just walked through, versus a practice where you may be by yourself most of the time. Um, let's go on to the next slide. I think I've covered most of that. Different types of private practices. You have, first off, all the different people that can employ you now. Um, a hospital. So there are folks that work directly for hospital. I work for a physician management group. So my employer is Pediatrics Medical Group, which employs physicians in about 32 states or so. It's probably the biggest in neonatology right now. You can work for a university. You can work for an insurance company. There are groups like Kaiser, Kelsey Siebold now, who's in town here, sold to United Healthcare. So you're essentially working for the insurance company. There are more private multi-specialty groups that still exist. For instance, Kelsey here in Houston before they sold to United Healthcare. I separated out physician-owned partnerships, and I think we've got folks on the panel that can speak more to that. And that's where you work for a practice, and you are part of that practice. And one of the goals is often to become to obtain equity and become part owner of that practice as well. Those opportunities do exist. They're less and less, and I'll leave other folks to speak to that. That is the one model that I haven't really had that much experience with. And then there's also, if you have the lifestyle that fits with that, there are lots of people that still like to do locums where you can go all over. Next slide. Where to look? You guys are probably better at this than I am. I haven't had to look for a job for a long time, but I know there are lots of different places that jobs are posted. We can go to the next slide. Day to day, things to think about. There's clinical and non-clinical time in an academic setting. So when I was at Texas Children's, I worked 3 months a year on service, and even when I was on service, I would have the first part of the day was for rounds, and then I would go to my lab, and then I would come back and check on how all the trainees, fellows, and everybody were doing with the patients at the end of the day and kind of wind it up. So I'd have 3 months on service, get a KO8 or an RO1, and you were on 2 months of service. The rest of the time was pretty thin as far as clinical time. In a private practice setting, you're going to be spending anywhere from 100% clinical time. So now, 20 years in with a lot of administrative duties, I'm now down to about 50% of my time is clinical, but that other part of the time is more administrative. It's doing my chief of staff duties and other advisory and leadership kind of duties. I don't do research anymore. There are people in our practice that do research, and we can talk about what clinical research. It's never going to be bench research in this kind of a set. Well, hardly ever bench research, but clinical research can happen in this type of a setting as well. We actually do a lot of that, usually in bigger practices. Um, so some people do have time allocated to that, but in general, it's pretty unusual to have more than 20, 25% administrative time, and that's usually limited to the leadership of the practice. Next page. Next page. Um, when you're looking at schedules, again, these are things to look at. There are lots of different kinds of jobs. There's call. First off, what most fellows are used to is call where you're in the hospital. There are a lot of jobs that you can go to where the call is from home. If you are taking call from home, you want to know how often you have to go in, and that's going to be very dependent on whether there's an NNP or somebody there to deal with emergencies, or it's a nursing base. You're going to have some amount of service time. It's going to be a lot more than what you would have in a university setting. Some amount of administrative responsibilities that you may do. But in thinking about what the days look like, there are a lot of different jobs again. So just to for framework, so in our practice, and we have 15 different NICUs in our practice. In the practice, there are NICUs where you have a nurse practitioner in-house 24/7. You go in and round there, or you get called in for emergencies when those happen. But when you go in and round, all the notes are done. If anything happens on the unit, all the routine stuff, they're calling the nurse practitioner, and that nurse practitioner is only turning around and calling you if there's an issue for you to deal with. So you're trading off the 24/7 availability for somebody who's there dealing with emergencies, handling all things. Then there are practices where there may not be a nurse practitioner and you may have to go in for those things, but it's a very different lifestyle than where I'm right now. I am here in the hospital, and I don't have an NNP on my team, have 12 to 15 patients, and I'm getting all the first calls from the nurses about everything. If it's a level two team, I might get calls about formula changes or diapers, or talking to all the parents myself every day. That is another big differentiator, is without all those layers in private practice setting, you are often, if not always, the primary person who's talking to the families every day. So and that kind of communication is important. You guys are used to it. As an attending at Texas Children's, I remember parents who would be kind of upset when they were talking to me because they knew something was wrong because the attendings didn't talk to all the patients every day, and couldn't, the way it was set up, and we were also training the fellows to do that. But in a private practice setting, sometimes nurse practitioners are handling those responsibilities. Most of the time, it's going to be physicians who are doing that. And then contact with other neonatologists. I was going to say that here, but it reminded me Billy walked in. So here, for a new fellow, like when we're recruiting people into our practice, for a new fellow, I would have a hard time placing somebody at the unit I was just describing up in Conroe, because when you're not in-house. So right now we have a new EMR from last week. So we've got 12 people here today, I think. So if you have issues, you can talk, you run into people all day. You can go have lunch with people. Anytime you have a question, there's people in the workroom with you that you can ask about it. That's a very different setting for a new fellow than even we have NICUs that average, say, 25 patients a day, where there's one doc and two NNPs that work every day. But if you're not in-house working with another neonatologist every day, you may not see another neonatologist unless you're very intentional about doing that, whether it's something outside of work or setting meetings where you're there at the same time. Very different than the environment that most fellows are used to be in a position where you are just by yourself all day. And next slide. How many interviews to do? I think that really depends on what you're looking for. I talk to folks who, because of what the relationship they're in or their partner, they may end up only able to interview in Houston, so they're going to interview at all the places in Houston. There are other people that may be looking all over the country. I think that really depends on what kind of job that you're looking for. I've got another slide, so I'll skip past that, but some of the things that you would want to be looking for. We can go to the next slide. Negotiations, and I think that's great, Nicole, that you guys are doing an hour on negotiation. I think that'll be really helpful. Nobody teaches us to do this. At least I should say nobody taught me to do that. Learning things are changing, well, which is great. Um, what's negotiable depends on the kind of practice you're going to also and what leverage you have as you're coming out. Most fellows are coming out in fairly the same situation. I will just talk about it very briefly as if I was recruiting to this practice. Um, if you're coming to the practice, so all other things being equal, in a private practice setting, I'm not looking at your research career. It doesn't help me that you had a grant before. It doesn't help me that you published a paper. I mean, it tells me something about you and how successful you are up to this point in your career. But if you came to me right now and you were already proficient in hemodynamics and had done a fellowship at Iowa and could start up a POCUS program for me, you would have significant leverage and I would look at you very differently, for instance. So um, think of the things we still, because we haven't had the right person at the right time, we still haven't started doing leave severance. If you could bring something to a program that is something new that will level it up to some extent, that goes a long way. And we're often looking in a larger practice for people with different interests that fit in different places too. So those are the kind of things that give you some amount of leverage and more negotiating ability. These days, now I'm speaking for a large physician management group type of a practice. It's not as negotiable as it used to be, and the same in my experience for if you're working for a company that ultimately rolls up to an insurance company, or if you're working for hospitals, if you're working for places that employ large number of physicians, you're going to have less negotiating power as well, because they're going to want to standardize everything. You're not going to want to hire people in at higher salaries unless there's a good reason to, like discussed earlier. You're not going to want to hire people in and pay them more than folks that have already been there for 3 or 4 years, because as soon as that comes out, then you're going to raise everybody's salary. So not that you shouldn't do that sometimes, that's also important to do, but just speaking about individuals negotiating, there's going to be some flexibility around base salary. Um, a little trick, which I'll throw out, is you typically have more negotiating power with signing bonuses because they are one time. Asking for an extra $20,000 a year, which you're going to pass out over 10 years, is very different than asking for that one time payment for that or for moving expenses or other things. That's typically a lot easier for people to come up with. CME allowances, there can be some wiggle room there, but they're often standardized across all the employment too. Partnership track timeline, again, not my area of expertise, but that is something that you would want to have defined how quickly you get to partnership, which is a big deal. Um, the rest of the things, usually your schedule is going to be the same as everybody else's, unless there's a good reason to have that be different. The schedule typically in most practices is the same for everybody in private practice because um, having inequitability around that, unless there's a real obvious reason where you're carving out time for administrative time or other things like starting up another program and spending some time doing that, you're not going to have a ton of ability to negotiate your schedule. You want to be really clear on what the schedule is when you're going into it. Tail coverage is usually the same. It's just I put that there to just remember to think about that. That is the insurance coverage that you have after you leave the practice for some number of years, 20, 25 years, which you need because in most states it's until 18 years or 21 years after the fact you can get sued, and you want to retain that coverage for the future. And then other things that are often fixed. We'll skip to the next slide. This is this this is my slide. I'm laughing at myself because this is the one that I let AI generate. I'm learning how to do that because I'm an old dog who's gonna learn some new tricks. Um, uh, so this, and I don't like slides at all, but this is the point being that you actually can do a lot in leadership. The timing for this is pretty similar to what happens in most larger private practices. You start out getting your feet wet, learning how to make decisions yourself, learning to not have people standing right behind you all the time. You may evolve into being a partner in the practice, having more responsibility in the practice. But then as you develop over subsequent years, and certainly 10 years plus, there are a lot of leadership possibilities, whether it's in hospital administration, it's leading certain parts of the practice, of the schedule, the QI efforts. We have three people who are dedicated just to QI, for instance, and someone who leads that, who's on the track to be the medical director of the NICU, which I'm not going to be much longer. There's directorship of individual NICUs, which is sort of an operational role for all those units. And then you get into system leadership where there are regional things, national things that you can do as well. And next slide. Oh, I said I wasn't going to give advice, and then I have a slide I forgot to take out that says, "What advice would you give a fellow now?" I think we've talked about most of this, and we can talk about this with questions also. But these are some of the things that we can talk about. Um, the one thing that I'll highlight there is asking about group culture. You really do work closely with these folks. I can honestly say, and I'm old school, and I'm not saying this is right or the way it should be, and I continue to hope it's not the way going forward, and we're trying to pivot in our practice. All that being said, I spent more time at work than I did with my family. The people that most of my waking hours were spent with the people I work with. You get to know them really well. You have a very different relationship with them, but you do want it to be people that you enjoy going to work with. You don't want to be in a part of a group where you don't, you really want to look forward to, every morning when I get up, I think about all the people that are there that day and I look forward to coming in and working with them. I think that's really important and an important thing to assess in general in a practice as you're coming in. And the smaller number of people in the practice, obviously, the more important that is. And there's lots of questions that you can ask during the interview that really, and no one's going to be offended by you being very specific about why did the last person leave, exactly what does your schedule look like, how many patients, you've got 25 patients there now every day last year? How many did you have 5 years ago? What do you expect 5 years from now? Those kinds of things I think are really important to ask. If people are wondering why I hear people ask questions like that, and I think, oh, this applicant is super sharp. This is the kind of person I want working for me. Someone who wants to negotiate their salary or talk about money or what their schedule is. I don't take offense at that. I think this is the kind of person I would want negotiating for our practice. So that's always been kind of a red flag for me. Somebody who does not want fear. You want somebody who could do your job. You don't want to work for the kind of person who's afraid that other people are going to challenge them. So that's my one little bit of advice, and I'll leave it at that and open it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate that. Before we get started on our questions, I just was going to introduce everybody else who was on the panel. So first I'll start with Dr. Angelina June. She did her medical school at the University of Maryland. She did her residency at EVMS, Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters, did her fellowship at the University of Virginia. Her current job is at Fairfax Children's Hospital in Northern Virginia, part of the Inova system, a level 4 NICU. And she has her email there if you would like to reach out. We then have Krista Matrone. She did her medical school at the University of Florida, her residency at Boston, and her fellowship at the University of Florida. Her current job is at Orlando Health in Winnie Palmer's Hospital in Orlando. She is currently the medical director of education and the program director for the Neonatal Perinatal Medicine Fellowship. We also have Sarah McAndrew. She did her medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Her residency was at Northwestern, and her fellowship was back at the Medical College of Wisconsin. She currently works for newborn care physicians in Milwaukee as a neonatologist. She's the medical director at the Aora Kenosha Medical Center, and she's also the co-director of the Newborn Hospitalist Program and a recruitment coordinator. Kara Sterling is went to NYU School of Medicine for her medical school. She did her residency at UNC and her fellowship at the University of Iowa. She currently works as a neonatologist with pediatrics. She is focused in Oregon and Washington as a part of three NICUs in Portland and one in Vancouver, Washington. Her current title is she's a practice medical director of the 18 physicians in her group, and she does regional newborn services medical director for Providence in Oregon. Hazel Villanueva, she did her medical school at the University of the City of Manila in Philippines. She did her residency in the Brooklyn Hospital Center and her fellowship at Stony Brook. She currently is an attending neonatologist under Johns Hopkins All Children's. She's primarily working at the affiliate HCA Florida Brandon Regional Hospital, which is a level 3 NICU. And she also works as an assistant professor of pediatrics for Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. So I'm going to open it up for our panelists now. And I'm going to first start by asking everybody to kind of go through and tell me a little bit about your day-to-day life practice and what it looks like. I'm going to start with Krista for this question.
Sure. So my NICU at Winnie Palmer Hospital is a 142 bed level 4 NICU. We also cover currently one level 1 nursery that's going to become a level 2 shortly and have two more coming on board this year. So our day-to-day life, we basically have a shift structure. So we're salaried and we work 180 shifts per month. All of our shifts are a maximum of 12 hours, including our overnight shifts. With that, we have a team-based structure. I think that David talked about some really important things about the day-to-day experience of going to work. We have 10 to 12 neonatologists working each day. So it's definitely a really collegial group and a lot of people to talk through complex patient problems or other issues that arise. Our NICU is a little unique in that we are very much a private practice. We have no university affiliation, but we do have both an associated standalone children's hospital, a residency program that has been ongoing for many years, as well as multiple pediatric subspecialty fellowships, including my fellowship, the NICU fellowship, which has been active since 2022. So there's a lot of teaching and supervision that is also part of my daily work and the work of any of the neonatologists in my practice who've chosen to be part of our teaching team. So while our primary job and sort of the revenue production aspect of our job is absolutely clinical patient care, there is also an opportunity for both supervision and teaching. We also take NNP students, and we have a variety of other learners like paramedics, medical students from the Florida State University College of Medicine, and like any variety of other people who may be coming through for different learning experiences that we play a part in their educational experience. Like David, at my practice, a lot of our work is direct clinical work. So of the teams that we cover, about 7 of them are neonatologist driven, which is to say neonatologists like myself see the patients primarily. We do our own orders, we update our own families, we write our own notes. There are some supervisory roles, both with our NNP staffed team and also with our teaching team, but the majority of our work is direct patient care. And so most of the clinicians in my practice are full-time clinicians, which is to say 100% of their time is dedicated to clinical work. And that's 180 shifts per year, as I mentioned, whereas some of us have different leadership roles that have some carved out administrative time. So in my case, I'm 80% clinical and I have 20% protection for my role as the program director.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can I ask the same question to Sarah? Can you tell us a little bit about your day-to-day?
Sure. So I'm based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm part of a group called Newborn Care Physicians, which is a group that covers 6 level 3s and 6 level 2 NICUs in Southeast Wisconsin. We provide 24/7 coverage in-house for our level 3s, or I should say most of our level 3s, with NNP in-house coverage for the remainder of our units. We have about 20 a little over 20 neonatologists, as well as a few newborn hospitalists that cover in our nurseries. So our day is, I would say the majority of our neonatologists are 90 to 100% clinically based. And we, given the staffing at level threes and level twos, our days are kind of split between doing in-house shift work or rounding at multiple different sites. So with some driving in between there, which lends itself to a little bit of variability and flexibility to scheduling. But at times we are the only neonatologists at the site that we're working that day, unless there are multiple rounders coming in. So there's a little bit of day-to-day variability to our clinical time, but it's mostly direct patient care. There are quite a bit of opportunities for administrative leadership roles given the breadth of sites that we work at. Should partners, choose or show interest in doing that, and then they get additional stipend support for that. We are not salary based, so we have a little bit of a unique structure to our group in that we are all individually self-employed physicians who then contract with our group, who then contract with the individual healthcare systems that we work within, which is about three to four. And so our billings are kind of direct for what we do. So kind of eat what you kill model. So our salary or our income will fluctuate year to year depending on kind of how many hours you're working and what your days are looking like. But it seems to have been a successful model in our practice. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Kara, would you mind going next?
Sure, thank you. I also work for a pediatrics group like David, but when I joined this group straight out of fellowship, it was actually a private group at the time. And so for the first couple of years, I was on contract, not yet an owner or board member, but then the group sold to pediatrics. And so it was sort of interesting to see the way that transition happened for our group, which was honestly not very different. I mean, obviously, we have a different employer and slightly different expectations, but really pediatrics, at least it was my experience that they let our group pretty much run itself the way we had been doing beforehand. And I think depending on how long a group's been with pediatrics or if they're newer or if they've been there a very long time, I think you're going to find all different models if somebody's looking at a practice within pediatrics. But it's been really great for us. And I think, what we cover for different NICUs. Two of them are smaller. They're all level 3 or 4, but the two smaller ones would just have one neonatologist rounding, and the other two would have either 2 or 3. And we're actually moving to 4 neos at one of our sites because the census has been so high. And so we have our compensation structure is a little bit unique, Sarah. I was interested to hear yours is unique to me too, but we have an internal point system where pediatrics gives us sort of an amount of money that we can pay ourselves however we want, and then we have sort of a bonus structure on top of that. But we award points internally based on clinical work, of course, clinical billings, but also call that you take and also administrative work. And so if somebody wants to do more of a leadership position, then they would have less clinical, of course, but you can also balance, do you like working more days but having less night call, or do you want to work more weekends, which are worth a little bit more, although everybody has to kind of work a minimum amount of weekends, but you can work more if you want and get paid more for that, and then have less of something else. We also use those points to allow people to set a different FTE. So somebody might be working 75% or 80% later on in their career or after having a baby or different things like that, versus when people are typically hired, they're hired at 1 FTE usually. And what that feels like is a little bit different for each person. And, the more night call you do, then the less day shifts you do. And so, we have some flexibility there. And also our call is, well, of course, during the day you're rounding, you're seeing the patients, just like David said, updating every family every day. Our call is all home call. We have NNPs as the first responders at all of our sites. And so that feels a little bit different. Some people feel like home call is the best, and for others, they just like sit home and worry. So, it kind of depends. We probably take more call because it's home call. I think people who are in-house have more days off to recover, I would assume, but I think that, that works differently for different people. A couple of things I would say just about our group. I think that I completely agree with David's presentation on sort of meeting the people, and when you see who you're going to work with when you're interviewing, I think that just has so much of an impact on, the kind of people that you might think, oh, that person's going to retire and I don't have to deal with them. But, I mean, it really is. It's very important that the people that you meet when you interview and hopefully when people are interviewing, try to meet everybody in the group if that's an option, or at least have an opportunity to interact with them, because I think that is so important. I agree.
And that person never retires.
Oh, sorry. And then I didn't say very much, like because I'm the practice medical director and then also have a contracted role with Providence, I actually have probably almost 80% administrative time now and just a smaller amount clinical, but that's a real extreme for me. Each of our units has a medical director in the NICU, and so those people have obviously more administrative time and less clinical. But when people join the group, I thought your AI model was really right on there, that typically there's a lot of clinical work early on, and then if people are interested in internal or external leadership roles, then that kind of evolves that way too.
Awesome, thank you. Hazel, could you tell us a little bit about your practice? It's a little bit different, and we know each other, so I know kind of your job history as well has been a little bit different, but having a different perspective on things.
Yeah, hello everyone. So right now I work for an academic institution, although in one of the affiliate community hospitals. But when I first started out, my first job as after fellowship was I work with a private practice of 8 neonatologists, and we used to cover level 2 and level 3 NICUs. And our model is you do 24-hour shift calls. We're all salaried. And then the physicians, there are 2 senior physicians who manage the practice. So they didn't really have a practice manager. So the senior ones are just the ones managing the finances. And so the bonus varies every year depending on how much profit the group had earned per year. So that's how it goes. So if we're not earning a lot in the first year, you're not going to get any bonus. So, but the good thing is, because it's a small group, we all knew each other. We're like family. The culture was great. There was no feeling of any, hierarchy or seniority. Even, the most experienced ones, they treat you like family. So that's, a plus for me. And in terms of like call schedule, as I said, it's like 24-hour shifts. And then we cover for each other just depending on what's going on with each other. So there's so much flexibility. And of course, it's mostly clinical work, and most of the administrative stuff were taken care of by the senior neos. And you have some minimum like administrative duties, like attending meetings, participating in quality improvement and hospital committees, like that. But it's not very, it's not being pushed on you. um, unlike if you are, say, in an academic, working for an academic institution, you're required to like attend 75% of the division meetings, for example. So, there's a lot of flexibility there. Um, and we practice family-centered care. So, we talk a lot with the families. We do our own procedures. So and we support each other, like especially when it's busy, because we didn't work with any advanced practice providers. It's just us. So sometimes, we would have somebody on backup call if it's really busy, or if we have critical babies. So we help each other out, like that. And then right now, I'm working in a community hospital. So even though I work for an academic institution now, I'm still more clinical. I do have some requirements from, from the main institution with regards, like I have, to do quality improvement projects. You have to set your SMART goals every year, things like that. So, so there's that. So there's a little bit of like pressure to do more, education and quality improvement as opposed to, in a small private practice setting.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Angie, can you tell us a little bit about your time? Angie is the newest grad on the panel today, so I thought it'd be an interesting perspective that she has going right into private practice.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. Just a little bit of background about me. I work at Inova Fairfax, and my private practice group is called Fairfax Neonatal Associates. It's a physician-owned private practice group of all neonatologists and our APPs. On a typical day, I typically work between 7:30 and 4 p.m. for day shift. And when I'm on service for a typical week, I work 5 days out of that week. But it's never 5 days in a row. It's either 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row. And then the other days are kind of off. So my weekends are a little bit offset. I answered one of the questions in the chat, and I think that I have a pretty good work-life balance. I've been really happy with my decision to go into private practice. I have about 12 weeks of vacation per year. And then, like I mentioned in the answer, for the days that I'm not working, I really have that time as my time. So there are some non-clinical projects I'm involved in, such as POCUS and also the Home NG program. And then in my company structure, that non-clinical time, non-patient facing time, I'm actually compensated for as long as I log it. So I found that to be a really big plus of private practice. A little bit more background. When I was applying to jobs, I graduated 2.5 years ago. I actually applied to be a physician scientist. So this was a total 180. And I just wanted to tell all the fellows on the call that if you're in the middle of your job search and it's December and you realize you don't actually want to go into academic medicine and don't want to be a physician scientist and run a lab, it's actually okay. And I'm glad I made that decision. Like some of the other panelists were saying on the call, for night call, unless I'm at the big level 4 hospital, I'm actually just taking home call for the 3 level 3s that we also cover as well. So you either cover one of the level 3s or you cover two of the level 3s that are close to each other, depending on which side you're on call for. And other than that, I echo what the other panelists have said. I really enjoy going to work every day. There's about 6 neonatologists on. It's very collegial. I absolutely love the people I work with. In our workroom, we actually have a lot of fun. Of course, when there's critical babies, we're all, supporting each other. But on a typical day when things are not on fire, we just joke around a lot. It's just such a fun atmosphere. I've really enjoyed my job so far, and happy to help in any way I can to answer questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump to a question that was asked in the chat about, what would be your typical weeks or shifts? I know Angie just kind of talked about how she works 5 days of the week. But how about Hazel? Can you say what is your work? How are you doing 24 hours? How do they decide the kind of clinical expectation of what that looks like compared to in the academic world where we talk about usually weeks instead of even hours?
Yeah, so when I was working, with a private practice, so as I said, we covered two hospitals. So level 2 is like, you round on the newborns on certain days, and as well as in the level 3. So we round on all newborns. So aside from your 24-hour calls, there are days that you have to do some, rounding in the newborns. When I first started, we didn't really round on newborns in the level 3 NICU, but like 5 years or 4 years after I joined the practice actually got bought out by a corporation that was based in North Carolina. So, and I guess at that time, like revenue was coming down, so they asked us to cover the newborns as well to increase revenue. So it kind of added to our like 24-hour calls because we were doing an average of about 7 24-hour calls. So when we had to cover, then like in a week, for example, when you're not on 24 hours, then you have to do rounds like maybe twice a week for newborns. So, and then it varies because some people would go on vacation. So, and depending on what the other neos in the group had requested for vacation, you can request for like a stretch of a week off or 2 weeks off if you want, but then you have to kind of pay it back when you come back. So you have to do like every other day 24-hour calls, and then because at the end of like the month it has to even out. You have to meet a certain number of hours. So yeah, so I did both like 24 hours and rounding. And then of course when it's busy, when you are rounding in the newborn nursery, you can finish early and go home. Like say you finish at 12, you can go home. But if there's an emergency in the level 3 or level 2, then you have to come in as like the backup neo.
Wow, okay. Very interesting. David, what is your practice like?
A little bit all over the place. The we avoid seeing newborns as much as possible. We're all newborn doctors at heart, but I don't think that was any of our choice. Um, and that is frequently because it's babies. That's often the thing that gets tacked on after a call night. I see that in a lot of places. We did that in Denver. We don't do that here. We have gotten pediatric nurse practitioners to do a lot of our newborn care. We do not have a hospital that's as busy as Winnie Palmer. Um, I had I had dinner with your medical director, and your place is crazy. But we see 260 NICU patients across all the sites and about 200 and plus newborns. We have mostly gotten those newborns seen by pediatric nurse practitioners. If the volume's enough, if it's just like 5 or 10 of them, you're not going to hire somebody to do it. You might have to do that. But the direct answer to your question is I would say, and a kind of an ancillary answer to the one I saw in the questions there too, in private practice, for the most part, whether it's structured as eat what you kill, thank you for saying that out loud, Sarah, so I could say it too, which is what we all call it, which that's all the situations solve the problem in a different way. So there's in a system like that, there's no arguing over the schedule. If everybody gets paid the same, then the arguments, if there are arguments, but the contention is all about who's working more or less for the same amount of money. If your compensation is directly related to how much you work, then that goes away. And there's more flexibility there. However, however things land, what I have seen in private practice and in my administrative roles, I've seen pretty much all the models in different places. If I haven't worked in them, is the harder you work, the more money you make. So there are places where so I know practices where you do 80 in-house call nights a year. You get, you still do weeks. We did weeks when I was in Denver, and you got 4 to 6 weeks off a year. Um, the practices where you work more, you tend to get paid more. So I am now in more of a lifestyle practice. When I came back here, I worked on bringing a whole big practice together. A lot of the things were set, and thank God for everybody here. It wasn't me who decided what it was. It was set before I got here. And I would say much more of a lifestyle practice. So at our level 4, you've got earmuffs on already, Krista, so you won't hear this. At our level 4, um, we are fortunate enough that we've been able to keep one person in-house at night with APPs as our backup. So, and instead of using the crazy 12 or 15 that you're using, we've got about 20. So you suddenly see we've maintained that as 1 in 20 call, which is almost unheard of in a place like this. That is probably the best that it would ever get in a level 4 unit, and it's just unique to the setting here in a big city. Um, and then it's shift work where we do half of the year, so 180, the 180, 183 or whatever, that's always half of the year, which is I think what you guys do too. But then it's set up more as shift works, and those shifts may be on a level 4 team, and we do a week at a time. And level 4, we try not to break up the continuity there and do at least a week. Level 2, you can break up a little bit more, but you may be on a level 2 team. You may be doing deliveries, transports, consults, or a shift may be a night call. And this is one thing to look at. So, and it's still, I still can't quite get over it, though it's nicer as I get older. Our night call is a shift that starts at 5 and ends after morning report in the morning when you get out at 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Um, so, so the things to look for if you're looking for a more lifestyle oriented practice, and I also kind of know in general what compensation looks like across the country, and we do not make as much as a lot of other places do, but there's almost no 24-hour shifts even in our system. I came from 36-hour shifts in every 3 hours in residency at Texas Children's, and once every 5 nights seeing newborns afterwards, and so you sort of have all that, and then you can get all the way to a more lifestyle-oriented practice like ours. You're going to have when you are on call, you can take a nap before you come in, do your call, and go home. You may put a bunch of those together. Lots of things you can do, but no question, we need more people to do that. And we overall, we the compensation is less. So there's going to be practices that you can find that fit whatever your needs are. Um, and then you've got the next tier, which is the folks in our practice. And it'd be really hard to start as a fellow in one of those practices, but um, in our level 2 units, so and really not by level, but average daily census. So the places that are 15 or less, that are kind of level 2 places, there you work half of the 24s of the year. So two people, you're working 180 24-hour shifts, but you're responsible for the 24 hours. You don't get called in a ton. It's pretty easy to do. The other way to say it is you get 6 months off a year, which I still can't get my head around either. Um, but the other, if you get up to, we have a few places that are like average daily census of 30 to 40. We've got three of those, and those you work 10 of them because when you are, some of them are in, two are in-house, one is from home. And the one from home, you've got two nurse practitioners there at night. It's all kind of different setups. But there you're working about 10, 20, but 24-hour shifts. So not 10 like day shifts. You're working a full 10, 24-hour shifts. And I think that has gotten to be fairly, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but from what I've seen at the higher acuity places, if you're really working full 24 hour shifts where you're very likely to get called back and you're getting a lot of calls at night. 10 of those a month seems to be about where things are landing. And then you get to the smaller units and then usually two people covering them. And then the big cutoff is with or without nurse practitioners. Doing the covering a level 2 unit like that, even if you've got 12 babies or whatever, and I'm looking at you, Hazel, without nurse practitioners, that's a different story. If you're getting all the calls and you have to come in for every delivery that they decide you have to come in for, that's a very different setup than that half of the year would be a different ask than with the nurse practitioner who's taking care of everything for you. So that's kind of the breadth of the whole thing for my practice and my musings on the rest of the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think everybody's learning a lot about different practices. And I think that's a big thing to say is that every practice does things differently. Did Kara or Sarah or Krista, did you have anything else to add with kind of a nuance of a schedule? I know, Kara, you said you're really only 20% clinical, which I think is a little bit different in this realm here.
Yeah, me personally, but the rest of my group I would say is much more standard. I think just because having a stacked on more administrative roles sort of inadvertently, you start saying yes and then you realize what have I done? But I think our practice, because of the home call, and it's so interesting hearing all these different models, but when we look at our schedule, we do it in a 6-month block. So I heard somebody saying if you're gone part of the month, you have to work harder the rest of the month. Ours has even a little bit more flexibility over that 6 months. So if you're gone for a lot of 1 month or something, you can kind of spread out the, making it up later. But we, on average, when somebody's joining right out of fellowship with very few administrative roles, they would do probably about 2.5 weeks of the month would be some clinical day work, some day shift. And then the other week and a half would be no scheduled work. And that, not all at once though. It's all sort of spread out. You might have 5 days in a row, you might have 3 days in a row, you might have 8 days in a row. If you can give some structure around what you're willing to do. We have people in the group who will work up to 14 days in a row because they want a lot of time off later to travel. We have a lot of people who like to travel a lot, and so they try to do all their work more close together. And that's just unique to, I think everybody does their schedule differently, but we definitely in the group, everybody works on average about half the weekends. I think, just if depending on how big your group is, how many people you need to cover a weekend, we still all work close to every other, even though doesn't always work out that way. I might do 3 in a row and then I might have 4 weekends off or something. But so weekend wise, it would be that. And then so in a month, 2.5 weeks of clinical work, half the weekends, plus probably 7 night calls. And again, those are home call. So then, it's not quite as good as David's half the year off, but then the rest of the time, then depending if you have administrative roles, you're going to have a lot less clinical time, but spend a lot more days doing your administrative work. And then everybody would attend meetings and things, and hopefully people are not calling into that when they're on vacation. But I would say compared to what I would have thought, it is more days off, but certainly if you're post call, does that feel like it depends on how busy your call nights are. And sometimes we don't, I mean, truly, and I'm not getting on wood here, but sometimes you don't get called at all for a couple nights in a row, and then you start to feel like that's great, and then you have a couple bad nights in a row. It's really hard. So
There's a definite balance there for sure. Sarah, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, ours is for better or for worse. It's I'm part-time within the group technically. I still work plenty, so I have no desire to work more. But I would say on average, most of the partners that are kind of by definition full-time in the group work 5 in-house calls per month. And then based on the number of calls that you do, you get a defined number of rounding days, which is where obviously your income comes. So to David's point, kind of the more you work, the more you earn. And then there is a additional home call responsibility where you're called in probably, I mean, it's very variable, but I would say somewhere between 20 to 15 to 30% of the time for really only higher acuity patients because all of the units are NNP staffed if you're taking home call for those units. So I would say a typical partner coming out of fellowship would work like 3 to 4 days a week rounding. When you're done rounding, you go home for the day unless you're on day call, and then 5 in-house shifts a month. So those shifts can be, very widely variable in terms of acuity. You can have some shifts that are, pretty quiet, but there are some shifts where you really are working your butt off, coming from start to finish. So, for anyone that feels like private practice is, a step down in acuity or clinical, abilities, there is no doubt in my mind that that is not true. I'm never bored or having any sort of period of time where I wish I was having more academic thought processes about my patients. There's plenty to go around, so just it kind of depends on what your career goals are.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanted to pivot and see if I could get a little more perspective on some opportunities for leadership. I think that people are so used to when you're in fellowship being in a academic center about what different leadership opportunities are. So I'm going to start with Krista and ask, what are the different opportunities? You're in a unique setting as more of a hybrid, but tell us a little bit about what different people are able to do in your practice.
Sure. So I think actually David gave a really great overview of this. There are many, many, many leadership roles in clinical settings that can range from clinically oriented leadership. And I think that's usually where in our group where people start. So for example, some of our earlier practice partners may become, as I did, the director of therapeutic hypothermia, or I'm the director of the ECMO program, or the director of the POCUS program. And they either build out or kind of optimize and continue to improve upon existing clinical programs that exist. And then those are usually stepping stones to more medical directorship type roles. Our practice has both medical directors of our expanding level 1 and 2 nurseries or NICUs, and also has a group of medical directors that take different responsibilities within our main level 4 NICU. And then obviously there's longer term, the potential to become the actual practice director who for us functions and is also called our division chief because she has many of the same roles or responsibilities that a division chief might in a more truly academic center. The thing that I did not know when I was a fellow is how many other types of leadership roles exist, both with a lot of these larger physician management groups. I'm also a pediatrics medical group employee. They have many physicians that have different types of leadership or administrative roles that they employ part-time as consultants, basically. They also, within hospital systems, there are a huge number of different leadership roles, including being like a medical staff liaison or leader. So ultimately, I think the number of different leadership options and sort of what you do in those roles is so broad. I think fellows are used to thinking about research, teaching, and clinical leadership, but there's also this whole like operational or financial leadership aspect, which is actually really fun and exciting, like understanding how to make a practice run and work. You hear that, I think, from all of the members of the panel, that all of us do have a more of an orientation towards how the actual shift structures work, how you reimburse and support your employees. And that type of leadership was not something I really had seen inside of. There was not transparency around that, at least in the academic practices I had kind of grown up in. So really, I think the opportunities are endless. And in fact, you may get more leadership than you might in an academic setting. I think David kind of referred to that too. I was voluntold 6 months in that I was going to take over the director of therapeutic hypothermia. I was like, okay, I guess that's what I do now. And beyond that, you can also more intentionally build leadership roles. So I always knew that I wanted to be a program director. So when we got our fellowship off the ground, I was able to start as APD 2 years out of fellowship. And then I became the PD 5 years out of fellowship, which I think is a trajectory that's a little speedier than might have been encountered if I had stayed in a more traditionally academic environment.
Wow, that's very interesting. I appreciate that perspective. Um, did anybody else have any opinions? I thought that was a great review of some different leadership opportunities. No, okay. I'm gonna move on, and my next question that was asked was a little bit about how do you feel your if I wanted people to talk about more about the meetings and kind of those things that we think about in the academic world, do you still have morbidity and mortality? Do you have kind of some of those quality improvement things that a lot of people have in fellowship? I'm going to start with Kara for this one, if that's okay.
Sure. When I talked about our transition from a private group to a part of a national group, we had a lot of things we had a shared governance structure previously with our group, but also a lot of all of our clinical work and quality improvement was internal before. And I mean, we benefit so much from having some of that available at the national level now with our national employer with, grand rounds and things like that, but we still have a lot of things that are internal to our group. And so we have a monthly clinical practice meeting where we discuss various different things that we might want to adopt as a guideline for the group. And it's usually two different things are proposed. And sometimes it's something that, there's been a new publication that came up, like when they said stop cooling 35 weekers, that, came up in clinical practice and we stopped that day. Sometimes it's something more, we're seeing a lot more infantile hemangiomas, and how do we feel we want to address that? And so then we'll come up with a guideline. And so that's one thing we do monthly, and that's mainly driven by people within the group who are interested in those particular clinical topics. And then we do have a group-wide kind of, we call it, what do we call it? Peer review, sort of quality assurance. It's not necessarily peer review the way you think of, like someone's been um, there hasn't been a complaint, but it's like M&M except without, I don't know, it feels a little different than what I remember from my academic setting, but we review cases, we certainly review all the deaths, and talk about opportunities. And there's one internal to our group, and then we have one at each hospital system. So there's actually some overlap there too, but that we participate in all of those. We have our med staff meetings for, the people working in the NICU plus the other, dietitians, pharmacists, nurses, people employed by the hospital, but also employed by our group. We would all attend med staff. There are, joint meetings with the MFM groups where we talk about a lot of shared issues. I'm trying to think, there's fetal therapy meetings, there's cardiology, there's kind of almost an unlimited number of meetings that you wouldn't think. I think, we have our national employer has grand rounds, but then there's grand rounds within each hospital system. There's sort of a collaboration in Oregon and Southwest Washington that we call the Northwest IPA. So it's the Northwest Improvement Priority Alliance, and it's a number of NICUs in those states will collaborate on different topics, so including OHSU and Kaiser and other groups outside of ours. And they have probably twice a month there's a meeting you could attend about various different topics and different presentations. So I think from some of that, when leaving academics, and like that was one of my favorite things as a fellow, is a lot of those educational sessions, and you definitely don't lose that going into private practice, depending on the group size and the layout. But I think I don't even know that I could remember to list them all, because I think we have a lot of that in our group at least. So
Great, thank you. Did anybody else want to add? I think a lot of people were nodding when Kara was saying what she was saying. I think a lot of people resonate with the thought that there's lots of different meetings that everybody goes to. Awesome. I'm going to ask a quick question from the chat about many times private practice is public service loan forgiveness ineligible. So are there any strategies that they are able to use instead for loan repayment? I guess I'm going to ask David as a pediatrics, is there anything, or Krista, you had your hand raised, I'll take that.
Um, all I was going to say is that, first of all, not all of them are public loan. Like some of them are eligible. So I don't think that I would rule out that that's a possibility. But the income difference in private practice, in my opinion, more than makes up for that between the increased salary, and also many places have a bonus structure. Um, I think that ultimately you come out still financially probably ahead working in most private practice environments than you would even with the loan forgiveness. Again, I would obviously say your mileage may vary because there's a lot of both regional and practice dependent variation in the reimbursement structure. But I don't feel that I was taking a financial hit by coming into private practice in terms of my kind of long-term financial stability or security.
And I had that experience. So I had loans that I can't remember the program because I'm getting old and it's now well over 20 years ago, but I had some loan forgiveness program that I was in based on academic standing at Texas Children's. When I went into private practice, I did not miss it at that point at all. Because there was but it is also true. So I'm not talking 20 years ago. The difference between academic and private practice salaries has closed. That gap has closed considerably. Um, a lot of the things that you'll hear from people are kind of based. I've seen both sides of it over time, and we're competing with salaries. So again, I can look at them again outside the window. Some of my favorite people over there competing with me for fellows. So I know for certain that that gap has closed over time. My starting salary at Texas Children's in 2003 was $105,000 a year. So we've got some inflationary measures and some other things that have changed over time. But at the time, it was not enough to pay your loans back, and you needed that money. But private practice, it was not an issue. I think that it's also true that in an academic university setting, it's scaled. The starting salaries are double that now, and it's only been 20 years too. So some of that pressure has gone off. But otherwise, I would agree with what Krista had to say. It's just not as much of an issue as it used to be.
One of the things that also contributes to that, and we haven't talked about this, but I do think it's worth asking everywhere you go how you're reimbursed for excess shifts. That is something that I think is handled in many, many different ways in academic settings. And sometimes the answer is that you're not reimbursed for extra shifts, whereas certainly in private practice, I think we would all put up quite a big stink if we had to work more without getting paid more. And so in terms of loan repayment, one of the things that's absolutely true in private practice is there's always going to be opportunities either for locums work or picking up additional shifts within your practice. And often the reimbursement for those is very appealing and can also offset some of the loan repayment issues that may come from not having the repayment program available.
Yeah, that's a good point, Krista. Even in a more lifestyle oriented, not making as much practice as ours, it's also a big practice with lots of gaps here and there intermittently. And the folks that need to make extra money, you also have the other half of the year to make up that extra money if you'd like to, if that's what you choose to do.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to ask one quick question to Angie. I think she's the only one who's part of a true old model of you're going to partnership practice, unless I am mistaken from what I've heard from everybody else. But I was wondering, Angie, if you could speak a little bit about what the partnership track kind of looks like for you, and as an earlier career neonatologist, kind of what they've talked to you about that and what that looks like.
Sure. From the outset, they told me that it's a 7-year partnership track. So that means every 7 years, my pay is raised until I meet pay parity with the other partners at year 7. Unlike academia, there's no promotion and tenure committee. You just have to be a good neonatologist for them to still want you in the practice, I suppose. So I feel like there's really no hoops to jump through necessarily. And I really like that in this particular practice, that was well, like, metered out. It was just clear. There's other private practices I interviewed at where they were saying maybe there's going to be a partnership position open if somebody retires. When it was murky like that, it made me feel a little bit not so confident about whether or not I would ever meet partnership status. But yeah, so basically my pay goes up every year until it matches the other partners in the practice, which I feel like is fair. But if you go outside of neonatology, outside of pediatrics, other physicians, their partner track is much shorter than ours. So I don't know if that's just because of pediatrics, unclear, but that's my experience.
There's not a lot of those left, and as stated earlier, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but I've been around a lot of people who have gone through that over the last 20 years. And just two things to look for. Number one would be to get some sense of the history of the practice, however you can do that, and look for people that are leaving, whatever the time is for that getting to be partner, getting equity in the practice. It's a red flag if the several people have left in a time that's a year under that. No one's gonna tell you for sure if that's going on, but that's one thing that you can look for. The other thing that you don't have a lot of control over, so I don't want to throw angst out into the air, but it's just something to be aware of. One of the reasons why there aren't as many opportunities like that around anymore is because a lot of those practices have sold to a bigger physician management group or insurance company. And I believe, Hazley, you said you've been through that. Um, the it's even if people knew that was going to happen, they're actually probably legally obligated to not tell you it's going to happen. So you can't expect a lot of transparency there. But whatever you can do to gather information, intelligence about markets and what things are happening, and just have your spidey sense up for that. Because if you spend 4 or 5 years and you're not partner and it sells at 4 or 5 years, you are not a partner and you don't have any equity to sell and you miss out on that. So you don't have control over that. I know people who have been a year on either side of that. It's just one of those things to be aware of, not something that you can necessarily do anything about.
For my particular practice, because we're contracted through Inova, which is a large hospital system in the Northern Virginia area, during my interview, they told me that they had a 10-year contract with Inova already, which made me feel a little bit better about, okay, I'll definitely get my first share in the company, which is at 3 years for my practice structure before their Inova contract expires. And hopefully they'll renew us too. But on the other side of that, we recently acquired a level 3, and I know the neonatologists in that practice were not expecting that. So, uh, for sure, it happens. And I guess Hazel has already proved that that can happen too. Those restructures can happen.
Yeah, not to worry if you don't. There are things we don't have control over.
Yeah,
Leave it at
and I
that.
will say when that happened to our group and I was not yet, I had only been with the group for 18 months when it happened. I certainly did not get the buyout that the board members
Yeah.
did, but they did pay each of us who was on contract at the time, not like a bribe, but it was a generous amount of money to stay because people were a little
Mhm.
bit irritated. You thought you had joined a private practice with a different plan, which now, of course, I mean, I've fully embraced it and I'm very happy that I'm here. But it was enough money that it was definitely worth staying. So, even if it does happen to you, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
I can just offer for our group, we have a partner model as well. It's pretty straightforward. If a individual is with our group for 2 years and they pass their boards, and they're in good clinical standing, then kind of by and large they are voted to be a partner with our group. There's not a buy-in model for that either. It's more of your own bonus and your stipend gets adjusted accordingly. And that is based off of a little bit of seniority as well as hours kind of worked within the group per year. So it's kind of a nice, kind of calculated model that you can be a part of. Um, and then just kind of to David's point about things that just to be, thinking about in the back of your mind, I think any private practice is always wondering if they would be absorbed within the hospital system and become employed physicians within that model. Certainly, there is a tendency towards that kind of nationally, but ways that we've achieved being able to remain private, truly private practice for over 40 years within our region has been we've been able to negotiate contracts within multiple healthcare systems and just find a way to staff them when they needed it the most. And so, obviously, providing really good clinical care and working collaboratively with the healthcare systems at the bedside, but also administratively creates a good working model. But then being able to make yourselves indisposable so that, the alternative of them trying to find multiple neonatologists within that region, should that contract not be renewed, would be quite difficult. So it works well kind of both ways, but you have to be strategic from a broader perspective to be able to sustain yourselves year to year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know that we're kind of running down on time. So I was going to ask if everyone could give one last either piece of advice for the fellows or potentially talk about like a myth that you've heard about private practice that you'd like to dispel for the fellows. I'm going to start with Hazel. She's at the top of my screen.
Um, yeah, so I guess the only advice I would when you're looking for a job is to really know what you want, what would fit your lifestyle, what your priorities are. And as David said, pointed out, it's very important to know what the kind of culture that the group has, because you're going to be working with those people. You want to be working with people you want to work with. That can be like a family that you feel you'll be supported. So, that's but maybe for me, that's the most important thing to consider.
Awesome. Thank you. Angie, you want to go next?
I think the one piece of advice, which I mentioned briefly in the chat too in Q&A, is to again iterate if you're looking at a private physician-owned private practice with that partnership track, to really just ask, is it clear or is it not clear about partnership? This is separate from, am I going to be bought out or not? But just be clear about the partnership thing, because I think it can, if you sense any murkiness, I would just consider that as a red flag.
Excellent advice. Kara?
I'm curious if the other people recruiting for their practices would say the same, but I know for our group, we've hired a number of people since I've been in this leadership role, and there's no match for private practice. So I think as opposed to residency and fellowship, although there wasn't a match for fellowship when I was applying, but if we interview somebody and we like them, we're going to offer them a position, and we also are in some ways hoping that they'll be ready to accept it or not accept it, sometimes on a short timeline. I think that's been interesting. We've had people who are willing that same week to say, yes, I'm coming. And then, and then it's done and our position is gone because we interviewed a couple people and we chose who we liked the most. But I think we have had candidates where they've said, oh, my next interview's in 6 weeks somewhere else. And it's like, we probably aren't going to wait that long because we have other people we need to get back to. And I think that was just one thing that it doesn't seem like. I wish there was more advice. I wish, honestly, I don't wish there was a match, but I wish there was a timeline, because sometimes I feel like we find out about great candidates later, who might reach out like in January when they're graduating in June, and we might have had an open position in the fall and it's already gone. And so I'm not trying to make people worry or hurry, but I think we're already hearing inquiries from second year fellows when we don't have an open position yet. But I just think like you really do, the more, if we find out about somebody we like, we'll open a position sometimes for them and then it's gone. And I think that's one thing that if you know where you might want to go, it seems to me like earlier is better to start looking. And I would definitely encourage people to reach out if they know the geography they want to be in, even without an open position. We've definitely at times opened a position because we had a good candidate who was interested. And so I think you might convince a group, just by sending an email, or if you know a contact. I get people referred to me all the time, by a friend of a friend or something. And so I think there's no harm in doing that, even if a position isn't posted.
I would definitely echo what Kara has to say. I do a lot of recruiting for my group, and many of our applicants and then subsequent hires come from word of mouth, and just the networks that you have created in your training. It's a really small world, even just in private practice, neonatology, and people that work within academics. So use your network to reach out, and you can't hurt by reaching out early. So I would definitely echo that advice.
Did you have any other advice that you wanted to offer, Sarah?
The only other thing I would say would just be to choose a job um, that you're doing what you love. So if you are really passionate about clinical medicine, then private practice is going to be the right path. But that if that is not where you thrive, then maybe a different role is going to be what you should lean towards, because there's just so many hours that you're spending doing this job. So you really have to enjoy the path that you choose.
Absolutely. Krista, would you mind going next?
Sure. So actually, the advice Sarah just gave is exactly the advice I was going to give, which is spend some time really reflecting on what specific parts of the daily job you really love, and also maybe which ones you really hate. So for example, I think David mentioned newborn care earlier. Newborn nursery is not my happy place. So when I was looking for a job, I was trying to find a job where I spent most of my time in a high acuity NICU. Luckily, I got a job where all my time is in a high acuity NICU. I do zero newborn care, and that's how I like it. But you may feel very differently. And I also think, this idea that if you love clinical medicine, like get a job where you're going to be able to both spend time and also be valued and reimbursed for that work, not for work that, like if you love research, then obviously I think that that's a very different career path or different types of jobs that you're going to look for. But the thing that always fed me about the work that brings me joy is the direct clinical care. I love talking to families. It doesn't bother me to get primary calls on my babies because I love taking care of them. And so my day-to-day work is spent the vast majority of the time doing something that I genuinely love and enjoy. And in terms of like the quality of life impact, I really can't overstate enjoying your daily life as a major important factor, right? If you're spending a lot of your time doing something that makes you a little bit miserable, you're probably just going to be miserable. So I think it's important to reflect on it. You don't have a lot of autonomy about that when you're in training because the work is so prescribed. You don't really have a lot of authority or ability to negotiate what you're doing. But that's not true of life after fellowship. You actually can control all of that. And remember that your first job doesn't have to be your last job.
Great advice. And I'm going to ask David to round us out with his advice or his myth for the fellows.
Oh, mostly the same thing. I'll st- I'll echo that I don't think I've hired somebody from a recruiter in a decade. It's all word of mouth. The second year fellows that I hear from as we're getting into summer and they haven't started their third year yet and they call or email and they can find somebody in the practice or they can find me. Those are the folks that I'm impressed by. You're not bugging people at all. So it's okay to be aggressive about networking. People see that as a strength typically. And then I'll leave it with the thing I've got in the chat here that we didn't say. This is something that personally made a big difference for me. When I was in Denver, it was the latter where the schedule was done 2 weeks before every month. And you can see Nicole shaking her. It's just that where you can't plan anything, you get maximum flexibility, but no planning. I'm not a planner, so I lived with it. And then here, the schedule's done for a year at a time. And again, I think to echo what everyone said, it kind of depends on what you like. You can pick these little things can make a big difference when it's all of your life. And I really enjoy. I found out that I can plan more than I thought I could, and I really like having my schedule done for a year right now. It kind of changed my life. All those little things make a difference. It's a fantastic job. I wouldn't do anything different. My first job was not my last job. All that's great, great comments and great advice from everybody. I want to work with all you guys. You guys are all really nice.
Uh, I'm just going to say thank you so much to everybody today for joining us on the panel. This has been a really great session, just talking about different perspectives, and I very much appreciate it. Just a reminder for those who are viewing that we are going to upload this webinar to TCAN YouTube within the next week. And if you wouldn't mind, please give us feedback with this QR code so that way we can make these sessions better and exactly what you're looking for. So again, thank you guys so much. And we will see you at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.